James Walkinshaw exposes how Secretary Noem misused DHS funds, prioritizing political allies and self-promotion over disaster relief and public safety. He warns that such actions undermine accountability, transparency, and trust in federal agencies.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I regret that Secretary Noem tapped out after 2 hours, but nonetheless, I want to focus on an issue that I think is really important: the misuse of taxpayer funds and the steering of DHS funds to politically connected firms tied to the Secretary's office, while hiding that activity from the American people. Secretary Noem has been criticized by members of her own party and by the Trump administration for being slow and ineffective when Americans actually need her help. Republican Senator Tom Tillis said she was, quote, slow off the mark in getting disaster aid out the door. A senior administration official recently told Politico that there was, quote, some fishy stuff going on with money at DHS. And the veto authority she handed to Corey Lewandowski over contracts and grants has delayed life-saving resources after disasters. So when it comes to helping disaster victims, she's been slow and ineffective. But when it came to spending money on her own image and then funneling that money to her friends and her political allies, she moved with remarkable speed. According to reporting by ProPublica, DHS obligated $220 million for an advertising campaign featuring her in staged, phony border imagery and featuring pictures of President Trump's private properties. That money, that taxpayer money, was routed through a newly created and secretive Delaware shell company. It was then secretly funneled from that shell company to a firm with direct political and personal ties to her office and her political operation. That firm is called the Strategy Group. This situation has all of the elements of political corruption. First, she invoked emergency authority to bypass competitive bidding. Second, she concealed the true destination of the money by routing it through a shell company, a red flag in any corruption investigation. Third, the firm that actually did the work, that filmed her attempting to herd cattle, has documented political and personal ties to the secretary and her senior leadership. Fourth, her directive requiring personal approval of all contracts over $100,000 concentrated power in the hands of the very people tied to the firm that secretly received the work, her and Mr. Lewandowski. At the exact time this contract was executed, DHS was diverting investigators and resources away from child exploitation, away from child trafficking, away from illegal gun smuggling. Yet somehow, she found nearly $250 million to promote herself, and the money flowed to her political allies. A federal contracting law expert, quoted in ProPublica, summarized it plainly. It's corrupt is the word. That's what I would have liked to ask the secretary about today. I would have asked if she personally approved the money that flowed to her political and personal allies. I would have asked if whether when she was governor of South Dakota in 2023 and the same firm got $8.5 million of taxpayer money, whether she steered the money to them. Because an official in her administration said she did. That's what I would have asked her. But she had to leave early. Mr. Glasheen, are you familiar with the Proud Boys?
I'm familiar with the name, yeah, Proud Boys.
Okay. Does the FBI still designate the Proud Boys as an extremist organization? They did in 2018 in President Trump's first term.
We are in the process right now of changing our categories for domestic terrorists.
So they're no longer designated as an extremist organization. The FBI designated them an extremist organization in 2018. Has that changed?
I'm not aware that they did that.
It's all over the media, sir. It's widely reported. Can you get back to me on that?
Sure will.
All right, thank you.
James Walkinshaw delivers a pointed critique of Secretary Kristi Noem's leadership at the Department of Homeland Security, focusing on the misuse of taxpayer funds and the prioritization of political interests over public safety. His testimony underscores a pattern in which federal resources intended for critical public services, such as disaster relief, child protection, and anti-trafficking efforts, were instead diverted towards self-promotion and politically connected allies. Walkinshaw frames these actions as not merely administrative misjudgments, but as systemic failures that combine corruption, cronyism, and a disregard for statutory obligations. By highlighting both the human and institutional consequences, he situates the issue within a broader context of accountability and governance. Central to Walkinshaw's argument is the allegation that Secretary Noem funneled $220 million through a secretive shell company to a politically tied firm, the Strategy Group, to promote her own image. This maneuver, he argues, demonstrates all the classic markers of corruption: bypassing competitive bidding through emergency authority, obscuring the destination of taxpayer funds, and concentrating contract approval power in the hands of individuals with personal and political connections. Walkinshaw emphasizes that these actions occurred while critical DHS resources were being diverted from urgent missions, such as child exploitation investigations, human trafficking interdiction, and illegal gun smuggling enforcement. The juxtaposition of personal promotion against public neglect underscores a moral and operational failure, highlighting the tangible risks to communities and vulnerable populations. Walkinshaw also raises concerns about transparency and institutional oversight. Despite repeated reporting and public scrutiny, the allocation of funds remains opaque, with minimal justification provided for drastic cuts or reallocations. By detailing the prior awards to the same firm during Noem's tenure as South Dakota governor, he suggests a persistent pattern of steering public resources to politically favorable entities, raising questions about intent and legality. His testimony thus frames the issue not only as a one-time lapse in judgment, but as indicative of systemic vulnerabilities in the way federal agencies administer contracts and grants. Additionally, Walkinshaw connects the conversation to broader questions of law enforcement and extremism. By briefly referencing the Proud Boys and the ongoing evolution of domestic terrorism designations, he situates the funding scandal within the context of national security. This linkage reinforces the point that mismanagement and politicization of resources have consequences beyond bureaucratic inefficiency. They can undermine both public safety and trust in federal institutions. The inability or unwillingness to maintain strict oversight over contracts, coupled with selective prioritization of politically advantageous projects, erodes the credibility of federal law enforcement and preparedness programs. Walkinshaw's testimony, while focused on specific financial and administrative decisions, implicitly advocates for stronger checks and balances within federal agencies. By documenting instances of fund misallocation, procedural circumvention, and concentrated authority, he highlights the necessity for transparency, independent oversight, and accountability mechanisms. His critique illustrates how administrative choices, if left unchecked, can compromise both operational effectiveness and ethical governance. Ultimately, Walkinshaw frames the issue as a convergence of corruption, mismanagement, and risk to the public. The diversion of funds away from pressing security priorities in favor of political self-interest is portrayed not as a minor procedural lapse, but as a systemic breach of trust that imperils both human welfare and institutional integrity. His testimony serves as a call to Congress, the public, and watchdog entities to ensure that taxpayer money is used responsibly, ethically, and in alignment with statutory and constitutional mandates.